Hello and welcome to the Chatsworth Quilt-Along. We are going to be working on block number 9 today on pages 20 and 21. With this block, I would encourage you again to get 4 different fabrics than you've had in any other combination of your blocks. You're going to follow the cutting chart, and we're going to start off with step number 1. And again, we've done this folded corner unit many times in the other blocks. You can again follow the drawing the line, or we're going to be able to use our simple folded corners ruler with this unit. So we're going to go ahead and start with that, and we're going to need one B rectangle out of our background, and we're going to need 2 D squares of the same print. Okay. And again, you can follow the diagrams and the steps where it says draw a line, but we're going to use a simple folded corners ruler, so we don't have to draw any lines on our D squares. And so I'm going to take one of the D squares, put one aside for a second, and the right sides together. We're going to align the top edge, the left and the right sides to make sure that it's nice and positioned correctly. And again, depending if you're left-handed, you're going to be able to keep the book normal way, and if you're right-handed, just to help you with your cutting, turn it 90 degrees to the right so that the way you cut is the way the diagram is facing. That way you know you have the angle correctly with the ruler. Okay, so I'm going to turn mine sideways since I'm left-handed. And we're going to use a simple folded corners ruler. We're using the mini this time. And you're going to line up the ruler. I can always say like on the 0 line. So your left edge is on the blunt, the 2.5s in the corner up here. Your other markings on there perfectly. And then we're going to trim. Okay. And now that is ready to sew. Discard this piece. And this has your 1/4 inch seam built in. And I have my stitch length at 2.0, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. And now we're going to be ready to press. Okay. We're going to set the seam, finger press it open, and again, you can follow the pressing instructions if you want on this, or you can press it open. The pressing instructions will make sure everything does nest when you go to sew your block together and all your pieces. So I always flip over from the back, and then on the front, I'm going to do a nice press. So it's nice and flat, and you have nice corners. So that is step 1B. Now 1C is where we're going to add the other D square to the opposite side that we just sewed on. And again, I'm going to turn it 180 degrees to kind of mimic my direction as I'm left-handed and I want to cut off the other corner. If you're right-handed, you're going to turn it so they're going up and down for both B and C. Again, line up the left, line up the top, line up the bottom. Again, the 0. And the nice part is, as you can tell now, because this 3 line happens to perfectly line up with our seam that we just sewed. And then your 2.5 is going to line up with your square, which is awesome. That kind of is just nice little extra guidelines to make sure that you know you have everything positioned correctly. I'm going to trim that. Okay, those are your little discards. And we're done with the ruler for right now. And we're going to go ahead and sew that again. I will often go ahead and cut a whole bunch of the folded corner units where I trim them all off, and I'll stack up a whole bunch of them in a pile, and then I can chain piece everything. So that's nice. So I would go ahead and do that with all 4 of one of each of the prints. Okay, set the seam with my iron. Finger press it again. Flip it over. And we have our step 1 unit completed. Okay. And again, that should come out to the size that it says in the book. We're going to set that aside, and we're going to go on to unit C, and that's step number 2. And with that one, we are going to need 1 A triangle from our background and 2 C triangles of the same print. Just like we've done before with other flying geese, we're going to start off with the left side, and we're going to line this corner down here on the bottom left. And then I always fold it on to line up the diagonal edge and line up the bottom. And so your 1/4 inch seam, you want your over and the extra overhang in the middle again. Okay. You can trim off that dog ear or you can leave it. Set my seam. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the right triangle. Again, line up the points there, the diagonal edge, the bottom of my unit, and then I flip it over just so I can check the seam to make sure it doesn't get twisted. Now is when I'll go ahead and usually trim that little dog ear. If you leave it in there and you press it open, it kind of folds back. If you were to press your seam to the side, the dog ear stays there, but when you go to trim up your unit, it gets trimmed off. So if you're pressing your seams open, you're gonna want to trim it off. Setting my seam again. Finger pressing. And it is bias, but by now you probably have learned it hasn't really affected anything. It doesn't really stretch too much if you don't abuse it. I'm gonna flip it over to the front. I always like to double check. And again, that kind of fun little trick. Remember, you take your iron, no matter if you're left or right-handed, and you put your iron kind of right in the middle of the iron, right on the point. And then you put your thumb and your middle finger on both sides of the geese and kind of bring your wings in, because sometimes, most of the times I should say, your geese wings like to kind of separate and always go out, and then that always makes sure you don't have nice points in the corner. Now we're going to go ahead and trim this to the size that it says in the book. Okay. I'm laying my ruler that happens to be that size. And then I can tell that the seams are perfectly aligned. And I have my 1/4 inch point, that's the biggest part. And I'm going to trim there. And because I'm sitting, I'm just going to trim one side at a time. Normally, if I was at my cutting table, I would go ahead and trim like 2 sides at a time. Okay. And we have our perfectly trimmed flying goose. This is Unit C. And now we're going to go ahead on to step number 3. And at step number 3, we're going to put our unit together. And so we're going to need 1 unit B and 1 unit C. We're going to make sure we got everything turned correctly and positioned. And that's how it's going to go together. And so you're going to make 1 unit of each of your 4 fabrics. Okay. When I go to line it up, the only thing you have to match right here, which is really nice, is these 2 seams. So I just kind of eyeball it and then stick a pin in there. And let's hope it matches. So when I say stick a pin in it, I just pin the top and I'll pin the bottom. So I want to make sure that doesn't go anywhere. Okay, let's see how we did. looks pretty good to me. So and it comes out nice point right there. And then it looks good here. And then you don't have to match anything in the middle. We're gonna set that seam. Okay, so that is our unit D, and you're gonna make 4 of those. So I have, kind of like Fun TV magic, I have my other 3 right here. And now we're gonna go ahead on to step number 4, where we're putting our block together. And we're just gonna make sure that we have our units turned correctly, just like it's shown in the diagram. And I'm gonna make sure I lay this out the way I like, with getting all the colors dispersed. And we're just going to make sure we twist and turn our units so everything lines up nicely. And there we go. And now we're going to sew a top half together and the bottom half together. And for pinning on this one, I'm going to use the poker method. I'm going to go right from this point, poked on the front. Poke there, and make sure it's straight. And then do a straddle pin on each side. So hopefully by now you've had a little practice with your points and you've been able to improve them, or you've been able to practice getting the points. Okay, and I always pin at the beginning and at the end. Again, I'm a pinner and I'm left-handed, so that's why it's always backwards. If you're right-handed, normally your pins are coming in from the right. Okay. I just turned this unit because I like the flying goose on top. Personal preference again. Okay, poker. Always rob the pins that I just sewed with. Use them again. And I do sew over pins, and I know that's wrong. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we check and see how we did. Ooh, that looks really good. So one down. That one looks great too. I'm gonna set my seam and press these seams open. And that's one of the things with the bulk here of coming in of both units. You have quite a bit of bulk, so it's nice to press it open. Even if you have pressed your seams in each of your units, the B and C units, press them to the sides. I would then again, when you go to put these units together and you kind of have your quadrants, I would press them open just to alleviate that bulk, because when your long arm or your sewing machine hits that, if you were going to go quilting it, it really kind of is pretty bulky. Some people clip their seams and spin them, and some people have other different tricks with a mallet or something like that. I just find that it's easy just pressing it open and making sure that it alleviates the bulk. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and sew that last seam, and we're going to line the middle, the left, the middle, and the right. Sometimes the pin just doesn't go in the right spot where you want it to go. Red thread under there. Take out our pins. How'd we do? Oh, that looks great. I can live with that. The center looks awesome. Okay, setting our seam. Okay, now we're gonna do one final press on the block. Awesome, and there is our block number 9 of our Chatsworth Quilt-Along. Thanks so much for sewing along, and we'll see you back for the next video on block number 10.